Welcome to Issues with Cartoons, the show that looks at adaptations and the source material of comics and cartoons. My name is Kyle.
My name is Carl.
And we are brand new at this, so we're going to kind of stumble our way through, but we are excited to talk about animation and the comics that inspired them. Maybe that would be a better way of introducing the show, but I'm just excited to talk with Carl about this stuff. We've been talking about doing a show like this for a little while now. And we are here specifically to talk about Avengers Mightiest Heroes, which is a show that Carl and I have been interested in covering for quite a bit. It's a show that I've watched. Carl, you've not watched it yet.
I haven't seen it, so this is my first steps into it. I've seen a lot of Marvel cartoons. I've seen most of them.
Right.
But this, I think, where you have a good dichotomy here of Kyle's seen the show, he loves the show, and I'm just watching it for the first time.
The question I'm going to probably ask you so many times is, so with it being your first time, what did you think? And it's probably going to be, it's kind of probably being its own little game on our show. But I really am interested in seeing what your impressions are, because I think the show's reputation is one of those things where it was gone too soon. I don't know if maybe the reason you missed it is because the window where it was airing was so short. It lasted 2 seasons. We're going to get into kind of the genesis of the show and how it came to production and how it was rolled out and why it went away. But I feel like its reputation is it's got a very dedicated fan base, but you know, because it was kind of there and gone. I don't know if maybe that's why you missed it. I don't know if you can pinpoint what made you miss that one specifically. I know there was a lot going on in 2010 to 2012 in terms of nerd media.
I think a lot of it had to do with I was maybe in school at that time. Yeah, it was like right when I was in college, so I just missed the boat on it, but I was like frequenting a comic book store. It's not like I was a stranger to it, but I will say that it had a great reputation online. Like this show definitely has like a cult following, and I see it.
Yeah.
I definitely see it, so that's what made me excited to do this deep dive on it too, because I'm literally watching it for the first time.
Well, and it's cool because I feel like when we talk about comic book animation specifically, when we inevitably talk about big two media,
right.
I feel like the stereotype or the kind of the usual way people talk about these things is DC animation usually is the strongest of the two,
right,
between Marvel and DC.
Yeah, Bruce Timm,
the king of cartoons, is generally cited as the peak of superhero animation, generally.
I'd agree with that.
When I hear people talk about Marvel animation, this is usually the example I hear most often as one of maybe the top 2 or 3 examples of very, very strong Marvel animation. And I it's an opinion I share. I'm interested as we move through this as someone you come up on X-Men, the animated series, yep, Batman, the animated series. Classic superhero cartoons. You have, I'm sure, a pretty good sense of what you consider strong animated media when it comes to comics and their adaptations. I'm interested in seeing where you find it fits in kind of the canon of cartoons and specifically Marvel animation, because it is such a short-lived show, but like you say, I feel like its impact is pretty strong.
Yeah, a lot of people rave about it, and what you just said, Batman and X-Men were the top ones for me, certainly. Maybe Spider-Man the animated series, we could put that in the running too. I think
for people our age, certainly.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So, you know, maybe we'll cover those later on. I'm certainly interested in covering those, but for now, this show is going to be Earth Mightiest Heroes straight through. We're going to do every episode.
Yep, there's 52 episodes, and we're gonna spend as much time as we can on each episode and really kind of dive in and look at not just the content of the episode, but anything that's kind of behind the scenes that we take interest in, and then where we kind of really want to bring our interest in comics and our knowledge of comics in is look at books that maybe either directly or indirectly inspired the work that that created these episodes. So
right. We're gonna look at the origin of certain characters, like the origin of Nick Fury. We're gonna read the first issue of Iron Man, cover that, and different comics throughout the way. We're gonna be doing a big giant Venn diagram of the comics to the show, and hopefully have some cool discussions.
It's very exciting. Marvel is one of those interesting ones too, where outside of the Ultimate line, most appearances, whenever we talk about DC, there are all sorts of permutations of the first Batman, the first Superman, the first Wonder Woman. With Marvel, there's generally speaking just one or two examples of those. So it's going to be very easy to kind of zero in on, the Iron Man that they were looking at to adapt. And Earth's Mightiest Heroes, I'll say probably 80 to 90% of their episodes probably have a direct source that they're looking at. Mm-hmm. Certainly these first 5 that are the first appearances of these characters and the introductions of these characters have books that we can look at and say, yeah, they had this book open when they were making the outline.
Right.
Others will kind of have to stretch a little bit to kind of find a more direct adaptation, but certainly they were you can tell watching the show that they're fans. And
yeah.
That's what I really love about this show. That's what I love about the X-Men show. That's what I love about the Batman show. They're so clearly fans, they wear it on their sleeves. And I think that's one of the reasons why this show in particular has such a dedicated audience, because they're all fans.
There's some great cameos. A lot of great cameos in this first one. So do you want to dive into it, or are we ready to?
Yeah, if I could just talk a little bit about kind of where the show came from, because I did a little bit of research just in preparation, and I wanted to kind of see kind of where this show started and kind of put it in context. Because this show was developed for TV by Josh Fine, who was working on a Hulk project before this that ended up, I don't know if it stopped developing or if it just transformed into an Avengers show. But he was hired to work on the Hulk. And I know, you're looking like very confused.
So wait, hold on.
Yeah.
This show clearly was used to promote the MCU at the time. Yeah. So it was this Hulk cartoon developed to promote Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton?
Great question. So let's look at the dates. So this show was developed. It was first being worked on in 2008, which was the year that Incredible Hulk
was the same year.
And Iron Man were put out. And it didn't air until 2010. But I think what we're going to find, and one thing that I'm really interested in talking to you about, is you can really tell where in the MCU production this show was made, because Iron Man and Hulk are so MCU'd, if I can verb it.
No, that's fine.
But then everyone else is very much the comic version in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like if this were made in 2011 or 2012 or 2013, I wonder how different it would have looked. Actually, we don't have to wonder, because if you look at what came after Earth's Mightiest Heroes, it was Avengers Assemble, which was a show that was so clearly like, oh, we got to capitalize on this mammoth Avengers movie we just made. And so the cast, the costumes, the setup mirrors a lot more of the MCU. But when we talk about this first episode, we're going to talk about how similar it is to Iron Man, the movie. And I feel like that's a product of its context, where it was made the year that movie came out. But yeah, interestingly, it was developed right after or around the time Iron Man and Incredible Hulk came out. Mm-hmm. And these first 5 episodes, and we had talked about this kind of before we started preparing for this show, they came out as mini episodes online. They were broken up into about 5-minute segments, and they were released, I think, on YouTube, certainly on the Disney XD website, which is, I think, where I watched them. And I don't remember the release dates, if they were every week or every day, but they did these little episodes, 5 minutes each, and then when they collected them and aired them, they put 4 of them together and made one normal episode.
Okay.
So
segments.
this episode 1, is called Iron Man is Born, and it's actually a compilation of 4 episodes. It's Iron Man is Born, Hydra Lives, Behold the Mandroids, and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And interestingly, if you are confused as to why on earth would you ever release the first episodes as mini episodes first and then do your show, it was actually part of the thing the studio was asking Josh Fine to do when he was developing Hulk, was give us micro content. And the reason was Genji Tartakovsky had just released Clone Wars. The 2D animated Clone Wars, not
what a great series too.
Oh man,
what a great series.
So, and that's another one that I would love to talk about sometime. But Genji Tartakovsky, Dexter's Laboratory, Samurai Jack, Primal,
He's
incredibly
infamous.
Accomplished. Maybe he's the king of cartoons. I don't know.
Maybe we can make a comparison.
He's
there.
so good. But he developed a Star Wars animated show that was short 5-minute episodes that took place between episodes 2 and 3. And it was, I guess, extremely successful, or at least successful enough to where Disney and Marvel wanted content like that.
And it was unprecedented at the time because it was like George Lucas authorized it, and he wasn't just letting everyone play in the sandbox. So at the time it came out, it was kind of a special thing.
Yeah.
And I remember that about it. And he asked him to make a second season, and that was like unprecedented too. So
and again, like Lucas the Innovator, like that was one of those examples where this genius was flexing his genius muscles and doing something that no one had done before and changed the industry. Because even after that, I mean, DC did the DC Nation shorts, which were kind of similar. There were these short 5-minute things. Justice League Action, I think, was also very short episodes.
That was great.
We're like condensing content into these little digestible pieces that could fit really easily into programming. Sort of was the trend for a while. And I'm not plugged into new animation enough to know if they still do things like that. But certainly that's the genesis and the context of this show. So, and when Josh Fine was developing the Avengers project, he envisioned a journey similar to what the MCU gave us, where you would highlight individual characters and then bring them together. Because he, I think, saw the Avengers as something that needed that sort of foundation to be laid out first. And I agree, because that's kind of how it was born in comics.
It's a big universe.
It is.
Marvel Universe is big. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of mythology.
And I feel like with a crowded stage that you get with Avengers, you need an opportunity to give them room to establish themselves as individuals first. I mean, you can do it, and there have been attempts to do it, and some have varied in their level of success, and certainly, if talking about Bruce Timm again, other than Batman and Superman, the only Justice League members to get those standalone things, everyone else kind of had to show up on stage at the same time with Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, and Martian Manhunter, and they didn't do that same sort of build-up before they were an established group in the Justice League cartoons.
They luckily introduced Superman in his own cartoon, and they had some of the characters set up, but like I remember Hawkgirl's origin, you just didn't know.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman's was fairly rushed. They had like a quick shot at Themyscira, and she gets the lasso of truth, and then boom, next scene.
Right.
Like there wasn't a lot of setup like this cartoon. I don't want to get too far ahead though, because I'm just going to talk about the first episode.
I know, and we kind of know a little more about what's coming than what we're going to talk about today, but that's okay. So let's talk about Iron Man is Born. You've never seen this show.
No.
What did you think of the first episode of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes?
The first episode, man, what a theme song. It's
my God, we gotta talk about the theme song.
Yeah, we do.
Forever Fight is Won by Bad City. And I guess there's another verse that they ended up making later, but I don't think they ended up using.
Did it get cut?
I think so, but when they and I wish I had the lyrics in front of me, but I guess the first verse kind of describes like our world's about to break is about the Hulk, and then they kind of describe each of those characters. But
it's catchy. It's not Teen Titans, but it'll do.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Well,
it'll do.
Again, as someone who's a fan of like Batman the Animated Series and Spider-Man and these kind of very like instrumental theme songs.
Yeah,
having a theme song with lyrics almost makes it kind of feel throwbacky in a weird way. But it's a 2010s show with a song that. Because I tend to find songs with lyrics for a theme song can wear thin for me sometimes.
Sure.
I don't know.
Especially when superhero fare, we like our orchestrated. We like our John Williams here.
Oh yeah, we love John. the king of orchestra. This song doesn't wear on me. I love this theme song.
Yeah, it's fun. It reminds me, like, the only Marvel show I can compare it to is maybe, like, Spectacular Spider-Man,
which came out around the same time.
Yeah, and they're both similar in that way. Maybe that's what was popular at the time, do, like, a little pop rock ballad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, yeah, sure.
I bet you're right. I'm sure it lives in a time period where that was trending again. To our benefit, because that is a killer song, and that intro sequence that they do, that compilation with the Hydra bots stamping through, and then the Avengers all kind of showing off their moves.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. You get a little bit of the Hulk, you get a little bit of Cap, you get a little bit of the Wasp. Sorry,
Wasp and Giant Man. Yeah, no, it's good, and I'll say too, like that shot at the end where they have all of them together. And then they have the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes logo.
You have to do that.
You have to do that. But what I'm really excited for you to see, and what I think they did differently when these were released as micro episodes, because I remember them as micro episodes.
I see.
Seeing them as a compilation is new to me. But when they did them as micro episodes, where they had that team shot, the first episode is about Iron Man. All you see is Iron Man. And then all you would see in the Thor episode is Thor. And then as they kind of
different characters.
As they meet, they would start adding more to the shot.
Ensemble.
And it reminds me of corner boxes where you would have the Avengers team headshots featured in the corner of the comic. And again, maybe that's just me bringing my context.
This is a complete side note, but Marvel, bring back corner boxes.
Oh my God, Marvel.
Marvel, bring back corner boxes.
Listen, DC can bring their old logo back.
Yeah.
You can do that too.
I would love to see it. I mean, made so many of those comics memorable for me.
And if I can plug you real quick.
Okay.
Zowie Comics is kind of your brand. We are both cartoonists. We probably should have mentioned that at the top of the show.
Yeah, that's fine. They'll find out. They'll find out about it.
I don't think we're going to not talk about it. But Zowie Comics is sort of your brand, and you have this fantastic, I'll call it an homage to Marvel Comics' old classic logo with the corner box.
You have to.
And I'm trying to find a good way to incorporate my brand into something like that, because you make it look so good. And that's what this reminds me of. All right, so I'm going to talk real quick about the production people.
Okay.
This was directed by Vinton Heck, and I'm going to say also that I'm going to try my best to pronounce names right, because I read these names all the time and I don't say them out loud. But
that's fine.
Vinton Heck did 8 episodes. He directed 8 episodes of the show. He storyboarded about half the show. Other things he has been involved with that you may have heard of: Harley Quinn, Young Justice.
Check.
He directed an episode of Invincible, 6 episodes of The Batman. He also storyboarded Batman: The Doom That Came to Gotham, Batman: The Long Halloween, Batman: Return of the Caped Crusader, which was the Adam West, Burt Ward animated project.
Okay.
Ultimate Spider-Man, Avengers Assemble, Young Justice, Harley Quinn, The Batman, and he storyboarded Justice League: The New Frontier.
Wow.
The adaptation of the Darwin Cook graphic novel we both love.
Yeah.
Which we are going to cover.
Yeah, we're big Darwin Cook fans here.
Oh, amazing. The supervising directors were Sierra Nielli, who worked on, among other things, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 2012 show, Teen Titans. He was a director for the Teen Titans cartoon from 2003. He was the supervising director for the first 15 episodes of the show. The one who really impressed me, and you maybe recognize this name, is Frank Parr, was another supervising director. Frank Parr, he has credit as a story director for Super Friends.
Oh, okay.
All the way back to the 70s.
I love those cartoons.
G.I. Joe, Mask of the Phantasm, Batman the Animated Series, which he served as a storyboard designer and artist and director. He directed a bunch of BTAS episodes, Batman the Animated Series.
All classics.
Yep. Was a director for the Spawn animated show, which we talked about covering, X-Men Evolution, Static Shock, the Ultimate Avengers movie, Tales of Asgard movie, Hulk Agents of Smash. He worked on Spectacular Spider-Man as well, Ultimate Spider-Man, Justice League Action, Planet Hulk, and Hulk Versus, which I don't know about Planet Hulk, but I know that Hulk Versus kind of fits into this same universe that we're talking about because it has a lot of the same voice actors. Gargoyles, Men in Black. Like, really impressive resume, Frank Parr.
It's incredible, actually. It's like everything from the 90s to early 2000s.
I mean, he's got his fingerprints. I would love to learn more about Frank Parr, frankly. I mean, what his career was like, because he's had his toe in so much of what we've grown up with and what we kind of look at as the canon of superhero animation.
Right.
But this episode was written by Brandon can't read my hand. Auman? Anyway, can't read my handwriting, but anyway. He also worked on Legends of Vox Machina, Spider-Man, the 2017 show, the 2012 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show, Hulk Agents of Smash. Like, he's had had some superhero credits also. We talked about Josh Fine. Another name that we haven't brought up yet that we need to talk about is Chris Yost. Chris Yost was the story editor. You may know his name from, he did some new X-Men comics, some X-Force comics. Craig Kyle was his writing partner. They've done lots of different comics together. They've done a lot of work in animation together. They co-created X-23 and X-Men Evolution. Chris Yost was also the writer of Thor Ragnarok and Thor the Dark World.
Oh, like the feature crossover and the feature films. I've heard the name before. I probably, because I'm such a big X-Men fan, probably reading about X-Men at some point.
Probably. Well, and relevant to this conversation, he was also, I think, similarly the story editor. If I'm not crediting what his role was, I apologize. But he worked on Wolverine and the X-Men, and there was some effort at the beginning, at least, to tie these two shows into the same universe.
I see.
Similar to Spectacular Spider-Man, although less so. But Wolverine and the X-Men, there was an effort at the beginning to make them coexist as the same show.
I didn't realize that.
Wolverine and the X-Men was canceled, and they ended up going their own way with it. But I think Stephen Bloom does the voice of Logan in both shows when he does show
interesting.
up. The voice of Nick Fury...
is that consistent?
Is the same voice.
Oh, wow. See, I didn't know that.
And the character designs are similar, but not necessarily the same. The voice actor for Nick Fury was Alex Dacer, who we'll talk about. But
yeah, sure.
But yeah, so I just wanted to get those names acknowledged.
Just got to talk about Chris Yost.
Yeah, have to talk about Chris Yost.
We have to.
And Tom Perkins is the character designer, who, if you don't follow him on Instagram, is worth following. He's great. I love the look of this show. The character designs for this show are...
It's very stylized.
Cool. Yeah.
It's very stylized.
Yeah, but I feel like it's also very comic appropriate. Like, I feel like he does a good job of making the designs from comics and from MCU designs kind of fit together.
There's some good shape language where it's like breaking away into more modern cartoons, yet it still honors that like John Buscema and Jack Kirby character designs at the same time. So it's like you're getting like what you like about the comics, and you're getting, toes into kind of the direction animations move with shows like we talked about Primal, for example.
Yep.
It's like it's modern, yet it's has enough of a nostalgia for you.
Honestly, it does kind of. I love that you kind of bring that up, because it does kind of feel like an outgrowth, knowing that they were looking at shows like Clone Wars, and knowing that inevitably you're going to look at shows like the DCAU.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like a nice kind of marriage, a sort of Venn diagram of those two styles,
right,
in its own way. I'll say that the visual language does favor more the DCAU as far as like animation and motion and action sequences and stuff, more so than because Gendy Tartakovsky is so stylized in his movement, in how he sets up a shot and how he sets up an action sequence.
Mm-hmm.
This definitely has more of the pace of a DCAU show, but to its benefit, for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to the show, so we love the theme song.
Right.
Tell me some more of your impressions.
So, my impression, I didn't know so much about the micro episode. We had discussed it before recording. You filled me in on that. But I always just took it as a show. So, like, when I'm watching this, I took it as a full episode.
And I think what ended up happening is they kind of just play like commercial breaks, right? I mean, when the micro episode kind of ends, you almost don't even know. And I think that's a testament to how they created those micro episodes. They do kind of fit.
Honestly, I didn't notice it so much with this episode, the cutaways where those breaks would have been. I might have noticed it on the next episode, but I will get into that. There was some pacing stuff there that I felt like they edited it later or something. Okay. It just didn't flow as well as this first one for me. But the first 10 minutes, it's basically MCU animated. Yep. We have a very Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark being introduced. Mm-hmm. You have Pepper Potts is there. You know, it's very similar.
Down to the garage.
Right.
Like they're when he suits up, they walk into this garage with all these sports cars, and it is the garage from Iron Man 2008.
Right.
Like with the same, probably the same sports cars. I didn't do a side by side, but
it's like they used a reference.
And the costuming that Rhodey and Pepper are wearing were very reminiscent of what you see them wear in the movie, where Rhodey's wearing like his military uniform and Pepper's got her hair pulled back just like Culture does.
It is. It's like the MCU versions for the first 10 minutes. And and so like that was a lot of my impression. I'm like, oh, it's really similar to like MCU. But as it went on, there was some characters that get introduced, you know, that I'm like, oh, okay, this show's starting to break away from the MCU in some significant ways.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I wrote down a couple of other MCU references or things that are obviously... They were obviously making this at the same time. Jarvis, specifically. If this was made... If they were developing this in 2007, that would have been a butler. It wouldn't have been an AI voice.
That's true.
I mean, because I think one thing that has become so kind of part of the lore of Iron Man now is Jarvis, which has always been true, but never in this form until Kevin Feige and Jon Favreau made it a Siri inside of our Iron Man. But Stark Tower, the kind of close-up shots of Tony in the Iron Man suit, I call it the Kubrick shot because it reminds me of 2001: Space Odyssey.
It's so classic now.
Yeah, almost. It's very much part of the language of an Iron Man story.
Yeah, we associate it with that character now, like those up close shots of Robert Downey Jr. cracking jokes in the cockpit.
With that computer interface.
Yeah, of course. It's it's in every film.
And I'm interested, and maybe you know, but I'm not familiar enough with Iron Man comics to know how, if at all, how present that was in Iron Man stories before that. It's been so long since I've seen the 90s cartoon. I never watched the Armored Avengers cartoon.
Look, there's two Iron Mans. There's Iron Man from the comics, and then there's Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man.
I'm so glad you said this, because I've never felt... I love Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah,
unrecognizable
Great
to
actor.
me as... fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic.
Fantastic.
But I see what you did there.
But... I didn't recognize him as the Tony Stark I had read in comics up to that point. Because to me, and we'll talk about this in the second part of the show, but the Tony Stark of the comics until 2008 did not resemble who we saw in a lot of ways.
Absolutely not.
And this show is pretty much Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man, to the point where the voice actor, if I can do some more research for you, Eric Loomis, has a lot of Iron Man credits, and I think has even done some ADR for Robert Downey Jr. ADR.
Because it sounds so similar.
Yeah, ADR is an acronym that I used to know what it stood for, but what it essentially is after they filmed
it's a post-editing.
It's post-editing, like you're adding dialogue in.
Inserting it.
After the fact.
Pedro Pascal on The Mandalorian.
Oh, yeah, the easiest paycheck that man has ever collected.
Yeah, is that actually... Is he ever in this suit? I gotta wonder.
I think in season 1 he was a lot, and then he's like, wait, I have to go make The Last of Us.
Yeah, basically.
But yeah, like Iron Man 2 video game, the Marvel Superheroes 4D short, Marvel vs. Capcom, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3...
Wait, hold on. I gotta pause you there. Because, alright, so I played a lot of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 growing up, and there's a clear difference between Iron Man in 3 and 2, you know? 3 is MCU Iron Man.
So much
sense. It's the fact that it has the same voice actor, like, definitely checks out, because I did not watch this show, but I played that game, and me and my friends talked about it when we would combat each other. We'd be like, this is definitely MCU Iron Man.
And isn't it so interesting that they just found the guy to just be MCU Tony? And I'm actually interested now, and I didn't see this in my research, I'm interested in if, because with Marvel's animation now, where they have What If, and they have all these other kind of projects.
A lot of properties.
And they do try to approximate the voice actors if they don't get the actors themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, like famously, Chadwick Boseman was the actual voice of T'Challa in the What If show.
And his last time playing the role.
Yeah. Famously. So I'm interested in, and I didn't see this in my research, but I wonder now who they have doing Tony's voice in any kind of animated projects they have now.
What If?
Because I know in Avengers Assemble, the show that superseded this, they got a different voice actor for Iron Man. I think it was Adrian Pasdar, who I know from Heroes, but
gotta recast your leads.
I guess. Although I think they got the same voice for Hulk. I don't remember. We're not covering that show. But yeah, so they got that voice actor. It's obviously very much trying to capitalize on the fact that 2008's Iron Man was a huge hit, changed superhero.
It did. It changed the landscape of things, for sure.
And changed Iron Man, like we talked about. And so getting someone like Eric Loomis who can approximate that voice so well and does a great job and injects a lot of that same kind of energy into this part makes sense to me. Or did you not find it to be a good approximation? Did it take you out of it?
I don't think there was a point where I was taken out of it. I just accepted it. I'm like, I know roughly when the show came out, so I was like, okay, this is clearly MCU Iron Man. And I looked up the date on my phone. I googled it, and I'm like, oh, this is obviously in service of the MCU at the time. But didn't Avengers Assemble result from the Disney buyout though? Like, what this show was created
The timing fits.
Yeah, this show was created like around Wolverine and the X-Men, right? So like, I want to say this was pre-MCU, but they had nods to the MCU, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think, and maybe this is something we can do some more research on. If I remember, 2010 was the buyout. Am I right?
Yeah, no, you're right.
So 2010 was the buyout, which is when this show started airing. So it had already been in production. But then it got a second season, which Wolverine and the X-Men did not. So I'm wondering then if maybe they hadn't figured out what they wanted to do yet until Avengers came out.
It's in a strange place.
And then when Avengers came out, they were like, all right, we're done with whatever this is. We're going to do MCU. We're going to MCUify this show even more and do our own thing. And
that's how it felt.
And I'll say too, and maybe we'll talk more about this when we get near the end of the show.
Okay.
But this show is very serialized. It's not as episodic, and what I mean by that is there are a lot of, and maybe it's not very evident now, but as you go through the show, there are a lot of continuing plot threads that carry over into other episodes, much like the Justice League show, much like Spectacular Spider-Man. So what happens later in the show is Jeff Loeb and Marvel Animation get Man of Action involved, and we can pinpoint when that happens as we cover the show. I'm not specifically sure where that happens, but I know it's in season 2.
So
they
Jeff
take
Loeb
over the
takes
show,
over.
and they make it more episodic, and they take away more of the serialization. So I bet if we were to watch Avengers Assemble, which I don't know if we will, but if we were, I bet it would be more episodic. Because I think they would go, and that's one of the reasons I think Spectacular Spider-Man was axed, is because they wanted to do more episodic storytelling.
Oh, definitely. That was a result of the Disney buyout. I remember for sure, because I remember Greg Wiseman kind of talking about online, and he has a bit of his own following between like that show and Gargoyles.
And Young Justice, those three.
Yeah, and Young Justice.
Maybe he's the king of cartoons. We'll crown the king someday.
He's got a cult following, dude. Is my point. Yeah, like his fan base is big. Yeah, it is. It is. He's a legend in his own right.
And when we get to the Spider-Man episode of Avengers, Spider-Man shows up.
Oh, I didn't know he was in it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I spoiled it. But there is some drama around that episode I'm excited to talk to you about that pertains to this conversation.
Does it pertain to the rights of Spider-Man, like Sony owning it?
Not specifically. Although that is probably a reason why he only shows up a couple times, and I'm almost 100% positive that's why they can't say outright this is the same Spider-Man as Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because they wanted that to coexist because they were in development at the same time, but they never overtly make that case. And I bet it's because Sony rights are so messed up to this day.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some kind of stipulation where Marvel can use Spider-Man in cartoons. We mentioned What If earlier. You know, Spider-Man is free to show up in What If.
Well, and we even mentioned the 2017 Spider-Man, which is a Marvel project. I don't know if it's a Sony collaboration.
Oh, you mean that cartoon?
Yeah, I've not watched it, but I'm aware of it.
I've seen it.
Have you watched it?
I've seen it. So that's a Marvel cartoon I've seen that Kyle hasn't seen.
Oh,
so
look at that.
We might have to reverse roles here, maybe.
Turn tables. All right. All right, let's get back to the episode, because I knew this would happen. I knew we would get off into
we went on a little tangent. It's fine.
Okay. One thing that struck me about the beginning of this episode is how they open the show with a POV of someone's camera. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting, like, kind of like found footage sort of thing where you see this robot in the ocean and then Iron Man swoops in, and that's how you meet Iron Man. And I'm like, well, I wonder if, like, Cloverfield came out in 2008 also. Did you ever see Cloverfield?
Yeah, I did.
So it's another in that sort of tradition of like the Blair Witch Project, where it's like all found footage. I mean, I don't know. They thankfully they don't carry that theme for the whole episode. But it was interesting that you were opening this show with a found footage shot.
Let me ask you this. Would you have preferred, like, more classic, like, Iron Man lands in from the sky and it's, like, not that point of... Not a, like, omnipotent point of view?
I don't know. I don't hate that it's a little different. I guess the merit of it is it does kind of... It positions you as a civilian with the extraordinary entering your world. Which is kind of a cool way, like it's a window into the world. But, you know, I don't know how intentional or how conscious it is. It might have just been a storytelling mechanism, which is, it's not like Cloverfield or Blair, which was the first time found footage was used as a device. But it struck me as interesting.
That's a choice, for sure.
You get a Hulkbuster unit reference, which is the very early, you get a reference to the Hulk. Which of course makes sense because Incredible Hulk was the other touch point for the MCU.
Right.
Kind of crazy. Hulk and Iron Man came out in 2008. The next MCU movie was Iron Man 2 in 2010, right? And then you don't get... So 2009 had nothing. Think about that.
That would never happen today.
Marvel Studios took a year off. Now... They'd taken a year off from cinema, but then they just did a ton of TV shows.
They did a ton of Disney Plus shows.
But, I mean, it's so interesting that in the nascency of this Goliath of a studio, they took a year off. like at the very.
It was a different time, and the big talk of the town, believe it or not, was Dark Knight.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the conversation. It was kind of like Dark Knight had came out. That was the mainstream one, and like Iron Man was like
Iron Man was the little movie,
and I had a perception that Iron Man was kind of based off of Batman Begins, and it was in a few different ways. I mean, we could get into that.
Whenever we cover the MCU movies, which we've talked about doing, I would love to do that comparative analysis because Nolan changed the language of superhero movies.
He did
for the 21st century.
I mean, we have to. If we're talking about 2008, though, I feel like I have to bring that up.
Oh, you have to. Well, no, it's so funny because I remember distinctly. It was Dark Knight was the movie. Iron Man and Hellboy 2 were the other two comic movies that year.
I forgot about Hellboy 2.
And it's so interesting that Iron Man probably for general audiences probably had the same kind of like real estate in your mind as Hellboy 2. Like it's just another superhero movie that came out that year, and then they saw it like, oh wait, this is something special. All right, so then you get this giant Hydra robot that comes out of the ocean that looks like a Brainiac skull ship.
It did. It looked exactly like the Jack Kirby design from
was it Superpowers?
Yeah, Superpowers. I was going to say Super Friends, but I stopped myself.
Well, I mean the Venn diagram.
The 80s, the toy line, and you're right, that it did. It looked exactly like Brainiac's skull ship.
So much like Brainiac's skull ship. I don't mind it, but it was very interesting. I'd be interested to know, and I didn't see anything about this, but I am interested in if that was unique to this show, or if that Hydra specific design was something that came from comics. Then Dreadnoughts are kind of the main bad in this. I don't know if you were familiar with Dreadnoughts.
I'm not.
I was vaguely familiar with them. They first appeared in Strange Tales 154 in 1967, created by Roy Thomas and Jim Steranko. So Strange Tales was the comic that featured Nick Fury at that time. So they were actually introduced as a Hydra, I guess, pawn, like a Hydra kind of drone. So you see them a lot in Hydra comics. They've also been used by the Machia family, AIM, and Ezekiel Stane. So when you read Matt Fraction's Iron Man, I guess Dreadnought showed up there. That's probably where I first saw them, actually. And then you get S.H.I.E.L.D. and you get Nick Fury and Maria Hill showing up. Maria Hill, interestingly, was sort of a relatively new addition to comics at that time. She first showed up in the New Avengers run by Bendis and David Finch.
I was about to say she's heavily featured in Ultimate Spider-Man, too.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Whenever there's a couple S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that follow Nick Fury around, and Nick Fury kind of monitors Spider-Man in that comic book in the early adventures and stuff. And Maria Hill, though, is a key character, so that lines up with Bendis.
I'll say too. So in New Avengers number 4, which is when she showed up, she was the acting director of S.H.I.E.L.D. at that time. I think. What I find interesting is she was not cast as Kobe Smulders at the time the show came out. That wasn't until Avengers came out in 2012.
Okay.
Well, you know what though? I'm saying she wasn't cast. Maybe she was cast, and that's what made them want to put her in it. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting that if we're making this MCU comparison,
sure,
how the dichotomy or the duality of Fury with Hill was very much established kind of in other media pretty much from the time Maria Hill showed up.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a function of Bendis' role as a member of the creative advisor group.
It's definitely his influence.
For listeners who aren't familiar, at the beginning of the MCU, Joe Quesada, Mark Millar, Brian Bendis, and a few other people were involved in kind of creative consultants for different projects that Marvel Studios was doing. And I don't know how much that reached into animation, but having Hill with Fury there, I don't know, it just struck me as interesting. Nick Fury first appeared in Sergeant Fury and his Silent Commandos in 1963 with Lee and Kirby. this obviously is kind of an amalgam of the classic 616 Nick Fury with the Ultimate Nick Fury.
We have to talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So, I had heard previously that Mark Millar and Brian Hitch had kind of taken credit for Samuel L. Jacksoning Nick Fury.
That's definitely true. And for those that don't know, the character in the Ultimate books and Ultimate Spider-Man that I mentioned earlier, the character was modeled after Samuel Jackson.
Yeah.
Which, coincidentally, not a coincidence, but they cast him in Iron Man.
Oh, yeah. I think that might have been
the
the condition of them using his likeness. I think he said, I'll do it if you put me in the movie.
Right.
Again, that's sort of maybe Hollywood lore.
It's
but
a strange situation where, like, the casting predated, like, the actor being attached to it.
Yeah.
In a strange way, and that never happens.
Well, and that's the impact of the Ultimate line, I think.
Yeah.
But, interestingly, Mark Millar and Brian Hitch actually didn't do the first black version of Nick Fury. That would have been Bendis and Allred in Ultimate Marvel Team Up number 5. He gets a 2-page appearance, and then I think after that, Mark Millar and Hitch really lean into the Jackson likeness. I think before he was a black man, just kind of a unique design by Allred, and then they really adopted that Jackson likeness. The reason I say this version is kind of an amalgam of 616 and Ultimate is primarily because the attitude is very much Ultimate Nick Fury. The obviously him being a black man is very much Ultimate Nick Fury. The trappings of S.H.I.E.L.D., the helicarrier, the jumpsuits.
It's so classic.
It's very classic Kirby Steranko. Yeah. In fact, there's a shot at the end of the episode where he has the wingsuit on. And I meant to look, and I didn't have time to. Where he kind of has his arms up, and you see the wingsuit that he glides to go catch. Was it Strucker or Grim Reaper at the very end? Regardless, it looked very familiar to me, and I almost wonder if they pulled it from classic Steranko or Kirby.
I wouldn't
comics,
be surprised.
It very much felt like a Steranko design, where they have like that kind of 60s spy-fi tech.
Oh, of course.
I really appreciated that I think that's sort of a trend we're going to find as we cover the show. There's a lot of Ultimate, there's a lot of 616, there's a little bit of their own thing that they're doing, but they do a good job of marrying the two, and then you kind of insert the MCU influence as it's developing on top of that. You get a lot of that on here.
I definitely picked that up watching it, that it was both classic Marvel and Ultimate Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, just going back to the episode, we get a really cool look at the helicarrier. That helicarrier design.
The helicarrier was fun. Actually, the beginning part with Iron Man, it really picks up once S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury show up. It really does pick up. And then you get some cool Am I jumping too far ahead with this? But yeah, you get some cool cameos with like MODOK and some other classic Marvel villains that just pop up. And that's where it picked up for me. And that's where the moment for me when I was watching it, where like I sat up in my seat a little bit and I was like, oh, this is deviating from the MCU. This isn't just a clone,
this is comics,
There's some heavy fan service in this show.
I think you're gonna, as we cover more of this and we go more in it, because there's so much of that in this show. There's so much of these kind of background characters, and what you're referencing is the Vault, which is this based villain prison. Prisons feature in these mini-sodes very prominently because they're building up to the premiere episodes, which is called Breakout, which if you're familiar with...
I wonder what that's about.
What could that be? The Vault comes from comics. It was in Avengers Annual number 15, which is 1986, and has been featured in all kinds of animation adaptations. I won't list them all because we're running long, but they've been in... The Vault has been around in...
Oh, it has. I remember reading Amazing Spider-Man in the 90s, and Venom was imprisoned in the Vault at one point, and he breaks loose, and his symbiotes in his blood, and it turns him into Venom. And yeah, it's part of the lore. It's part of the Marvel Comics lore.
What strikes me is it's featured so heavily in other adaptations that why on earth did they have other ones? Like this show, Fury references, they're all 4 are different, or all 5 are different, whatever he says.
Yeah.
And Maria Hill's like, well, I didn't know there were that many. Me neither, Maria. I didn't know that. I knew there were a couple, but I didn't know that, the vault was just one of a handful.
It's cool to hear it mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't get mentioned in this.
Yeah, we see MODOK, we see Technovore, which Technovore was a character who I was not familiar with, but apparently there's an animated movie written by the same screenwriter featuring Iron Man and the Technovore, which, I don't know, take that as some trivia. We see the Crimson Dynamo, who will feature more, and then the main 2 featured villains of this part of the episode were Baron Wolfgang von Strucker and the Grim Reaper. What was your familiarity with these 2 characters walking into this episode?
I mean, Strucker, I'm going to preface this with Kyle is a much bigger Avengers fan than I am.
That's true.
I definitely read more of like Batman and the X-Men lore. So, but like Strucker, I'd heard in the MCU obviously, but not a lot before this. Maybe Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but that's about it.
Yeah, Strucker, he's very different in the MCU. He's not very prominently featured. He's in it. He's in Age of Ultron. He's in that opening act. He has a very integral part into the Scarlet Witch Quicksilver origin. But he's very much a Nick Fury villain. Very much a Hydra character. He was in Sergeant Fury and the Silent Commandos #5, and then he got carried over into Strange Tales when Nick Fury was kind of brought into the spy world. But I don't think he's as well known to fans as other Hydra people like Madam Hydra, or this show uses Red Skull and Baron Zemo's Hydra figures, which is another kind of MCU influence, I think. Another Jim Lee Jack Kirby character features the Satan's Claw, which I think in our second half of the show, when we talk about the comics, we'll kind of compare and contrast how the Did you know who the Grim Reaper was? We all know who the Grim Reaper is. The Marvel Grim Reaper.
No, I'm not gonna lie. I had no idea who that character was.
Like you said, I feel like your corner of Marvel is very much Spider-Man, X-Men.
Yeah.
And mine is very much Avengers, and Captain America specifically were my 2 comics that I read when I was a kid through my adulthood. So I knew going in kind of the connection to Grim Reaper and the Avengers lore. But in this one, he's very much... it gave me a lot of... I don't know why. Maybe it's just because he's like the subservient, like badass lackey of Hydra.
Yeah.
It gave me kind of Darth Maul vibes in this, or like where he's just kind of like the big... He's
the big bad. Yeah, he's the boss.
Yeah, he's like the...
boss battle.
Yeah, he's the assassin you send in to like do the dirty work, and he breaks out Strucker, and that sequence was probably my favorite in the episode.
Okay.
Iron Man is not a character who I don't gravitate toward that character.
Sure.
Even in comics, I never really have. I get the appeal. He's very, toyetic. He's very interesting. The character of Tony Stark is very charismatic. I get the appeal. Maybe it's because I'm a Captain America guy. I've always gravitated more towards the characters like Captain America, Nick Fury, those kind of like, action-oriented, like spy-fi characters are always more my speed. But
yeah, I do want to bring up that there's an association I have with Hydra.
Oh, tell me.
In being like... very similar to Spectre, because like Nick Fury is, you have to remember the older version of Nick Fury, Jim Steranko specifically, is modeled after James Bond.
Yeah.
It's basically Marvel James Bond. So Spectre is kind of Hydra in my eyes.
Absolutely
I associate them the
intentional.
same.
It has to be intentional. I agree. Well, and I'll go one further for it. I don't know if you know this, but when they were bringing Nick Fury into what was at that time modern in the 1960s, they were capitalizing on, comics does this all the time, especially in the old days. Whatever was popular, they would capitalize on. And in those days,
yeah, for
60s,
sure. Sean
Connery, James Bond, shows like the Avengers, not the superhero Avengers, but like the Emma Peel Avengers, and then Man from U.N.C.L.E. Are you familiar with Man from U.N.C.L.E.?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. was very much looking at capitalizing off the popularity of things like Man from U.N.C.L.E. Even the typeface of the way they spelled out Uncle with the acronym very much, I think, influenced that. So you're 100% right. They were definitely looking at things like James Bond, the 60s Mission Impossibles. They were looking at all those things when they were developing it. I think it's inevitable to make that comparison. And in that way, Von Strucker will remind you very much of brain fart. Who was the head of Spectre?
Blofeld. Ernest Starvo Blofeld.
Down to the monocle. I mean,
that's what I mean. That when I have this association with Spectre, you know.
And I wonder too if we're thinking about kind of the genesis of that, where they're like, okay, well, we have this kind of gruff ex-military man who we're going to make into this kind of rough and tumble James Bond, this American James Bond. Who's going to be his Blofeld? Well, we have this Nazi from his Sergeant Fury comics who already has a bald head and a monocle.
Right.
Let's just use him. I wonder if that, because at that point Kirby had left Strange Tales and it was Jim Steranko. We'll talk about Jim Steranko, but I think you're right, and I think this show does a good job of kind of staying true to that influence. Because I'm trying to think, in 2010, when this cartoon came out, by then it was Daniel Craig Bond. But I don't think Spectre was being used at that point. I think Spectre came
they didn't have the rights
later.
For it.
Oh, is that why they didn't use Spectre?
They didn't have the rights for a really long time.
I didn't realize that was the reason.
It goes all the way back to that controversy with the Thunderball script. And like the rights split there, where like Ian Fleming didn't write that whole novel, like another author helped with it, and the rights got split. That's why we saw like Never Say Never Again came out the same time as that Roger Moore film and all that stuff.
I'd struck by that because I never knew why that coexisted with Roger Moore. I didn't know all their.
It's crazy.
Even James Bond has rights issues, man.
Yeah, there's a big story
James
there.
James Bond and Spider-Man. There's your connection.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
If people want to read into that, that's a rabbit hole to go down. The rights to Thunderball.
So interesting. Which makes all of this even that much more fascinating to me. All right, so I mean, other things we could talk about. I mean, we have Jimmy Woo has a little cameo appearance. The flying car was another kind of classic Kirby thing I noticed. Anything else you want to talk about with the cartoon specifically? I know we've talked a long time about the cartoon portion, but
my general impression of it, it's fun. You know, the first 10 minutes I was just like, oh, this is just MCU. Like I said, Nick Fury shows up. I do want to bring up something that made me think of X-Men Apocalypse.
Oh, tell me.
This is kind of random. Like when I think it's Baron von Strucker does something to Nick Fury and his hair changes.
Oh,
and it glad you brought this up. It gives him the classic Nick Fury hairstyle.
He had his white temples.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of like Rogue in X-Men 1, where like Magneto uses the machine and changes her hair color.
Man, they really didn't have to do that extra step, did they?
I don't think they needed it.
He could have just had white hair. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, but they made it like a plot point, which is fine, but that's so true. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Did we need that nod to classic Fury? I mean, like, did that serve anything for you? Or like, I thought it was fine, but it did throw me out a little bit.
I'll tell you what it did. And again, they didn't have to use Satan's Claw to get there. They could have He could have been a middle-aged man with graying hair.
I have Satan's Claw. I'm changing your hair color.
Look what it can do. You will need a dye job now. Right. I was a Nazi. So I guess what it did for me visually is it immediately puts you into the space of this is not Ultimate Nick Fury exclusively. This is definitely a marriage of Ultimate and 616. I only bring that up because in Season 2 they do lean into Ultimate Nick Fury. But by then, MCU had really taken off. So to me, I guess I did appreciate that it was an effort to kind of show you visually that this is not just one or the other. We are making something that is influenced by both, influenced by kind of all three elements of Marvel's brand at that point, which was Ultimate, 616, and MCU. To me, that's what it did for me. I agree 100%. The impetus, the impulse of these properties, of these studios to feel like every visual element of a character has to be earned is strange to me. You don't need to. He can just be an older man, but maybe they wanted to show off Satan's Claw, which does not feature very heavily in this show after this.
If you're gonna do that, show us where Fury got the eye patch over that.
I love
you know what I mean?
That because that's what I would rather see.
Yeah, I would rather see that than like Satan's Claw changing his hair color. But this is just all minor gripes. You know, I get that they were trying to marry Ultimate and 616.
You'll notice in this conversation that has been going on for a while now, I think that's probably the only criticism I've really had so far with this episode.
I don't have a lot of criticisms. That's a nitpick.
Would we even call it a criticism? I agree. I think it's a nitpick.
Yeah, it's definitely a small
For me, this show is going to be more nitpicks than gripes, I think, because I do love this show, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I definitely enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great Easter eggs for Marvel fans.
I'm so glad you think that, because we're going to be talking about this for 51 more times, because we have more to get to. All right, but let's take a break. We'll come back, and we'll talk about some comics.
Hi, welcome back to Issues with Cartoons. Me and Kyle are going to be talking about some classic Marvel tales, and we're just going to jump into it.
Yeah, so one of the things that had me really excited about doing this show was not only are we going to be talking about the cartoon and what we love about it, but we're going to go back and look at the source material that, if not directly, then certainly indirectly influenced the episode we just watched. So in this case, the episode title for Earth's Mightiest Heroes Episode 1 was Iron Man is Born, which is the same title as Tales of Suspense number 39's debut story of Iron Man. Iron Man is Born, published May 1963. The plot by Stan the Man Lee, script by Larry Lieber, art by Don Heck, lettering by Artie Simek, and the cover by Jack the King Kirby. Had you read this before?
I haven't read Iron Man's first appearance before.
I don't think I had either. I had seen like pages of it on, like we had talked about the Marvel 5 Fabulous Decades book that was a coffee table book we read as kids. I'd seen snippets of it in that.
Right.
Certainly I knew the origin, but I'd never read the actual story. So I have some information for you about some of the creators if you're interested.
All right.
So,
jump right in. Don Heck, is a name I've heard many, many times.
Yeah.
Jack Kirby, we're going to talk about, and we've been talking about
Jack Kirby. If you don't know much about Jack Kirby, welcome. We're going to talk about Jack Kirby probably every episode. Everyone I feel like who is familiar with this content knows who Stan Lee is. Mm-hmm. Jack Kirby is probably the next name that people are familiar with as far as the classic comics, but certainly less so than Stan Lee. Well worth covering. Jack Kirby did the cover. Covers were generally done first, so he was the one who got to design this OG Iron Man suit. But Don Heck did the interiors. Don Heck was born in 1929, lived until 1995. He first worked repurposing newspaper comics and making them into comic books for Harvey Comics. Interestingly, we are from Columbus, Ohio. His influence was Milton Caniff from Terry and the Pirates, who is from Ohio. I think he actually went to Ohio State. I was reading and looking at his art, and I had read Don Heck comics before because I read old Avengers comics, but I definitely see Milton Caniff in there. Another person who's very interested in Milton Caniff is John Romita. I think if you read John Romita's stuff, you'll see a lot of Milton Caniff. There's definitely an overlap there. Don Heck did a lot of, he did everything. He did science fiction, war, romance, fantasy, westerns, but he worked with Lee during the Atlas Comics times all the way through. He's done X-Men, Amazing Spider-Man, some Captain Marvel. He also was the ghost artist on Lee Falk's The Phantom comic strip. And he also did work on Terry and the Pirates for newspapers.
The Phantom predates a lot of superhero comics.
Predates
I think 42,
Superman.
right?
Was it 90? Maybe I had the date wrong.
Yeah.
It's definitely Golden Age. Golden Age.
And that's interesting to bring up.
Yeah, so I don't know when he starts his ghost artist gig. I'm sure it was later, but notable co-creations of Don Heck: Iron Man, Pepper Potts, The Mandarin, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Wonder Man, Count Nefaria, Swordsman, Power Man, The Collector, Black Goliath, The Living Laser, Mantis, Polaris, Havoc, and Commander Steel for DC.
That is a lot of the Marvel Universe.
That is a pretty big chunk. I feel like Don Heck under-celebrated. So anyway, I'm glad we got to talk about him here. Larry Lieber. Do you know who Larry Lieber is?
Heard the name.
Stan Lee's brother. Was actually a cartoonist, was a penciler, who did some penciling in the 50s, but then Stan needed help scripting. And so actually a few of the books we're going to talk about, the one in episode 2 we talk about, Larry Lieber also did scripting duties, but he did scripting for Thor, Iron Man, and Ant-Man. He was actually the one who, if my research is correct, is credited with creating the alter ego names for these characters, because he actually wrote the scripts with the dialogue that said Anthony Stark, which I think is super interesting. So he helped introduce, among others, Loki, Odin, Balder, the Wizard. His big book that he worked on was the Rawhide Kid, starting with issue 41. He worked on that for 9 years. In fact, he wrote and drew Rawhide Kid. I knew who Larry Lieber was. I didn't know he drew. I didn't know he was an artist.
Right.
But he also was involved when, so I don't know how familiar you are with Marvel Comics history. I'm sure know what Atlas Comics is.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the 1940s they were timely. They restructured as Atlas Comics, probably for some tax reasons, in the 50s, and then they became Marvel in the 60s, and then that carried them until today. In the 70s, Martin Goodman tried bringing Atlas Comics back as a competitor for Marvel and DC. And he brought Larry Lieber, who, you'll remember, Martin Goodman, the publisher, was Stan Lee's, I think, cousin or uncle.
He's his uncle.
Yeah. So Larry Lieber would also have been Martin Goodman's nephew. So Lieber did some work for Atlas in the 70s. He also worked in Marvel UK. And then he also worked on the Hulk and Spider-Man newspaper strips. So, pretty good bona fides as a creator. Helps that Stan Lee is his brother.
Right.
Alright, so this issue, Tales of Suspense 39, a storied issue in Marvel lore, gave us Iron Man. What'd you think?
13 pages, reads pretty quick. Lot of things. I was drawing parallels to MCU Iron Man the whole time.
Inevitably.
The story overall, I kept thinking about how much the Iron Man suit has changed over the years. You know, this Iron Man suit is literally made out of steel. It resembles more of a pulp character than it does like our superhero version we have today.
Yeah.
I thought the art was very much a precursor to what we'd see later from Marvel, you know, but a little bit more pulpy.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pulp connection is really interesting. I think that's definitely a good point. And given that Don Heck is influenced by Terry and the Pirates, which is very much like a seafaring, very pulpy newspaper strip. He obviously worked on The Phantom, which is maybe the pulpiest newspaper comic you can think of. Swashbuckling is the word. In fact, Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling actor of the 1940s and 30s, was the model that Don Heck used for Anthony Stark. That you
that's
pointed out.
interesting.
They don't call him Tony yet. Anthony Stark.
Yeah.
So the characterization is based on Howard Hughes, the aviator, millionaire.
Oh, that's interesting. They do look really similar.
Yeah, and visually it was very much kind of a composite of Errol Flynn and Howard Hughes.
What did you think of the story?
Can we get the elephant in the middle of the room out of the way?
Okay, sure. Go for it, Kyle.
This is super racist.
It is.
Like, the visual depiction is not very flattering to Southeast Asia. Progressive as I think our recollection of early Marvel is, and they were very progressive.
They've always been trendy.
Very much so. I mean, Stan Lee, I think, would have been considered a progressive thinker in his day. We are very appreciative of that. I think we also forget, particularly with Asian characters, Marvel has a very problematic history going all the way back to the Golden Age. And I think that is evident here.
Yeah.
This character, Wong Chu, is the primary antagonist. He's the one who, in the 2008 film, that character is supplanted by the Ten Rings terrorist organization.
Right.
Which is, they go out of their way to point out a multinational terrorist organization. They don't associate them with any one nation or ethnicity. And this one is very much pointed at, they're a Viet Cong stand-in.
All pop culture is a product of its time. And so we're going to have this character in this early Marvel comic, and then we're going to have terrorism in the early 2000s. Yeah. Because that was the great fear at the time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very much a 1960s comic. The story is very familiar to anyone who's grown up with the MCU. Tony Stark, who is not the Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark.
He's definitely not.
Much more kind of like a noble, stereotypical protagonist in this. Is a weapons manufacturer. They don't really do the pacifist story that you see in...
No, that wasn't
even
there.
in the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes cartoon, there's very much like, I don't make weapons, we don't do weapons. Like, I'm not... Yeah. I'm leaving that behind. In this one, like, Iron Man kills a dude at the end, which is kind of interesting given what the stereotype for classic superhero storytelling is.
Iron Man's out for revenge, and
he has an Uncle Ben character in Jensen who carries over into the MCU movie. Mm-hmm. And it is interesting that he's just kind of like the typical American military industrial complex, like, propaganda protagonist there.
Yeah.
It's like, America, rah rah, I make weapons to fight the bad guys, and these bad guys are all Viet Cong, and we're going to color them kind of a yellowish green and make them look really make them look like another. So, again, that doesn't make it a bad story. I'll say that you have to just kind of be aware of the problematic history of Asians in Marvel comics and Western comics.
In media,
so.
In any of the early Marvel comics, you're going to have issues like this. Like, we were talking about Fantastic Four, how badly Sue is written in those early issues. I mean, they're great Jack Kirby art, but writing's kind of questionable in 2024.
Well, and it's interesting because I had thought that, and I know that Pepper will show up later, but I was surprised, like, this pretty much has there's no presence of Pepper in these stories or Happy in these stories. I didn't know, and we didn't talk about this before, I didn't know that Rhodey didn't show up until the when did he show up? He didn't show up until 1979.
Wow.
But they would retcon him to be involved in Tony's origin as Iron Man later. But obviously this is pretty much just Tony, and then for some reason the military thinks it's a good idea to bring their weapons manufacturer into a war zone where he steps over some tripwire and then gets shrapnel in his heart. And he has to keep that shrapnel out of his heart, and so he creates the Iron Man armor with the help of Jensen.
That is unchanged in, like, all media. Iron Man losing his heart and having the arc reactor installed and stuff. That's, like, the common thread. That's, like, the part of the story that doesn't change.
Yeah, very much that kind of that character flaw that was a physical flaw in this iteration. That kind of Tin Man needs a heart, Wizard of Oz sort of thing.
I didn't draw that parallel, but that's really interesting. Yeah, that might have been a thing.
And I don't know how conscious that was. I mean, I know Stan Lee probably has seen Wizard of Oz, but again, you have this very pulpy, actiony character whose heart is under attack all the time. And so he creates this suit of armor that he has to... Do you remember... I don't know how familiar you are with 60s Iron Man. I'm only familiar with him in the context of Avengers comics, but he wore that chest plate all the time.
Oh, yeah, no, that was the thing.
Given the bulkiness of the Jack Kirby design, is sort of hilarious, because you just imagine if a tech bro today was walking around with a button-up shirt with this giant iron lung hiding underneath, and he was just like pretending like he wasn't wearing it. You know what I mean? Because at the time, the other thing we need to talk about, the difference between classic Marvel and MCU Marvel, is secret identities. And in this iteration, and they don't talk about it in this story, but later they would go out of their way to make kind of a convoluted reason why Iron Man and Tony Stark had to be two different people, and why they were trying to hide it from the world. So it's just interesting.
My earliest recollection of seeing Iron Man was I read a reprint of Avengers 4 where they find Cap, right?
Yeah.
And the suit was yellow. You know what I mean? Like, it was similar to this one, and he's kind of got like a skirt. He's got like a little kilt.
Oh yeah, like a little tunic.
Yeah, a little iron kilt. You know, and even as a kid, I was like, man, the armor's changed a lot over the years. I'm not one of those people. I can't tell you what mock we're on or what mark we're on, what version of the armor.
This Jack Kirby design is pretty much what they use as the Mach 1 in the 2008 Iron Man, which is really interesting and cool.
It's a homage to it for sure. That whole opening is this issue.
Yeah,
I can't stress that enough. That that's
it really
the same story.
Direct. It is pretty direct with very minor updates. I think that's one of the reasons why fans gravitated toward that movie so much, is they really elegantly upgraded this very 1960s story into a War on Terror era film. It really did translate very well and very nicely. And again, you just inject a little bit of Robert Downey Jr. personality, and you kind of add this, well, I don't want to be a weapons manufacturer anymore. Because, in other issues we'll talk about, Stark still makes weapons for S.H.I.E.L.D. in early Marvel. Like, he's not anti-weapon the way kind of Iron Man portrays himself in MCU or in Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
Yeah.
So, very interesting.
I think I've said everything I can about this.
That's pretty much all my notes.
Let's jump to the next issue we're going to talk about.
So, Strange Tales 158, which was from July 1968, it's called The Final Encounter, with editor Stan Lee, writer-artist Jim Steranko, letterer Sam Rosen. And this concludes a story arc that reintroduces Baron von Strucker into the contemporary Marvel stories with Nick Fury. You have read Steranko's Nick Fury before.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Did you remember this story at all?
I'll be honest, going back to it, I didn't remember it as well. It'd been a long time. I first heard about Jim Steranko History Channel back in the early 2000s. Ran
the Comics on Mass documentary?
Yes, ran a 4-part comic book documentary, and they interviewed all these creators.
Highly recommended. If you want to get into comics, really good primer for comics history.
Yeah, that got me started. I want to say, in knowing that there was other artists out there, and that Stan Lee didn't make everything, and there's Jim Steranko, and there's John Buscema, and there's Kirby, and it gave me that nugget to dig a little bit further into that.
This episode is almost 2 hours long. We could spend an entire episode of this talking about Jim Steranko.
Yeah.
Fascinating guy. Just some quick highlights. You're wearing an X-Men t-shirt with the X-Men logo. Jim Steranko designed that logo.
Right.
And Jim Steranko brought pop art, surrealism art. He had a lot of influences from outside of comics. Where the generation before had a lot of pulp and newspaper comic influence, he was very much into like Dali, and he was very much into like Mad Men, like advertising design and stuff like that. So you see that a little bit in this issue, with some of the ways he plays with zipatones and colors.
Yeah.
For anyone listening, the Jack Kirby collection of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., followed closely by the Jim Steranko collection, is well worth your time to read. It's really monumentally impressive stuff with the tech and the comic processes that they do.
Yeah.
The way he plays with color. He colored this himself, which I don't know, other than Neil Adams, I don't know how many people really did that. I always associate Steranko and Neil Adams are very much, they were contemporaries. I kind of consider them peers.
Yeah.
Steranko is much less prolific in terms of the output that he made, but I feel like his impact is very felt.
But I've heard a lot of people compare Jim Steranko to Jimi Hendrix, and that like his output was like really short-lived, but it has a presence to this day, and it's very influential. And for that reason, like not even as a Marvel fan, if you're a creator or you're a fan of comics, like I implore you, go check out the Jim Steranko issues. They are seminal. They're key to comics history.
Is the word.
Yeah.
I've heard Bendis has called him the Orson Welles of comics. In terms of like the amount of film output that Welles had, but the impact that work had on the medium.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. So again, we could spend all day talking about him. A couple of highlights for you. Was a stage magician, boxer, fencer. He was arrested for burglary and carjacking when he was a teenager.
He's a true artist.
He was an illusionist and escape artist, and I'm sure you know what fun factoid I'm about to drop. But Jack Kirby was so into just the allure of Jim Steranko that when he created his fourth world, the character Mr. Miracle was inspired by escape artist Jim Steranko.
See, I didn't know that.
You didn't?
That's so interesting.
One of my favorite factoids about the fourth world.
I know Kirby personally trained Steranko, and that I want to say this,
of, like laying out and things like that.
Yeah, he taught him the Marvel House style, and something I want to talk about is that Steranko started out as like kind of a Kirby clone or a Ramita clone.
1,000%. You can definitely see it.
And he deviates. He's kind of like Sienkiewicz in that way.
Oh, I was thinking of Sienkiewicz when you were talking about this.
Yeah, like Sienkiewicz started out very typical Marvel House style,
Neil
and then he
style.
deviated.
Yeah. And when he became himself, that's when he became a household name.
Exactly.
And I love that you bring that up. And Kirby's job, his other job, other than being the keystone of Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
Not only was he drawing everything, he was drawing everyone else's stuff. Because what they would do is people would come in and they would do an issue and Lee would be like, that's not quite the Marvel pop that we need.
Exactly.
Hey, Jack, draw the layouts and then have them kind of do some like Marvel school over your layouts, and then we'll let them run with it. And that's what Steranko did. Is he did finishes on Kirby layouts. Then he drew with, I think, Roy Thomas scripting, and then he said, just give me the keys, let me do it.
Yeah, let me color it. Don't let some old ladies in a warehouse color it. Let me color it.
Let me write it, let me color it, let me draw it, let me do all of it. So very psychedelic, very pop art, very surreal, lots of photo collages. I talk about the Strange Tales 4-page spread when we were off the air. Look that up. He did some seminal issues of Captain America. Mm-hmm. Again, we didn't even talk about his influence in film, how he designed Indiana Jones.
See, I don't know that time, but we got to talk about that another time.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're going long. So anything else you want to say about Strange Tales? We didn't talk much about the plot.
It's very typical, like, secret agent fights Blofeld, like, in a base that's falling apart, and we were talking about Spectre earlier. There is a hilarious sequence at the end where Nick Fury has, like, these Mission Impossible masks, where, like, he's wearing a mask, but then...
The epidermasks.
Yeah, but then, like... But then Strucker's wearing the mask, but then you find out that Strucker is actually Nick Fury.
It's
and
like a triple fake.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah. It's incredible.
You find out that, like, Nick Fury was wearing two masks, And so that's how he gets out of the situation. Like, it's great.
Do that in like Mission Impossible 3?
They do.
Something
they do
like that in one of those movies.
It's a motif of or a thread in all the Mission Impossibles,
so funny,
in the films too. With Tom Cruise.
It's been a long time since I've read the Steranko Fury issue. That is a scene. As I was approaching that scene, I was like, "Oh wait, I remember this is bonkers," and it was bonkers.
It is bonkers.
It made the issue for me
in a good way.
Yeah.
In a good way.
As far as correlating it with the cartoon show, not a whole lot to say. I mean, the Satan Clause, not really what the show does. It's just it doesn't like.
I'll say this: they're almost two different characters. I mean, like between Ultimate Nick Fury and Jim Steranko Nick Fury are almost two different Marvel characters.
I agree. And honestly, kind of going back to what we talked about with, I think stylistically, like visually, like the trappings of S.H.I.E.L.D. very 616.
Yeah.
Fury is very much Sam Jackson Fury. That's all.
Yeah. And that's the differences here.
All right. Anything else you want to say?
I think we're ready to call it.
All right. How far in? We are an hour and 25 minutes in. Folks, not every episode will be this long. But if it is, I think it'll just be to mine and Carl's benefit because I love talking about this.
Yeah, I know. I love talking about this.
We can't help it. So I hope you subscribe, you follow, you come back for more. We're going to cover every episode in some degree of this kind of deep dive with the cartoon followed by the comics, and we hope you watch along, read along, tell us what your thoughts are, tell people you know who are interested in this. If you've never seen this show, or if you know people who've not seen this show, have them experience it for the first time with us. We want you to come along on this journey and give you some context and give you some outlet for talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and on that note, I would love it if this show could become a discussion. Give us suggestions of what comics to read, and different things that you want to hear.
Yeah, I'll say I've kind of mapped out where some of this coverage is going to go. I don't have all of it figured out. If you have recommendations, we want to hear it.
Yeah, definitely.
Speak up and let's make this kind of a little community. Let's do it.
Let your voice be heard.
That's right. All right, Carl, anything you want to plug?
Not really. You can find my art at www.carllucasdraws.com. I'll be at SBX this weekend with Freddie Kocherin, and I'll be selling some of my zines and mini comics. I got a new zine all about Toonami.
Oh, look at that. Cartoons and comics. Do you have any social media handles?
You can find me at lucas.carl on Instagram. I think I'm Carl Lucas Draws on Facebook, and you could find me there.
Carl Lucas. And then I have an Instagram, Saturday Morning Cartoonist. You can also find my comic work at ko-fi.com/Kyle Windle, KYLEWINDLE. Got a couple of mini comics on there. Got one collection of a short web comic I did called Cornelius Armstrong, and more to come. But thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.